Well, I want to thank Crenshaw for leading this presser, pulling us together to have some very important conversations that frankly aren't being had right now. He mentioned the policy issues on the border and the fact that we need to put our border as a priority over the borders of other nations first. I think that's a very important conversation. I want to dive a little deeper specifically into the Ukraine funding debate. There seems to be two islands right now. There's an island that says we will do whatever it takes, sort of a blank check mentality that this president has adopted. And another island that is basically stating not a dollar more, not a dime more in support of Ukraine. I think there's a place in the middle that allows us to still defeat Russia, make sure that we secure Ukraine, but also focusing on the priorities like our border and not the expense of those things. I think it's important to note that any war effort funded by American taxpayers should have the support and understanding not only of the taxpayers, but also of the representatives in Congress who work for those taxpayers. A lack of transparency and accountability by the executive branch, combined with an absence of a coherent win strategy and a path to peace, is the forcing function for what I see as an erosion of support against an endless funding that we're seeing both in Congress and among the American people. They're getting tired of this endless funding stream. The current stalemate on the ground in Ukraine is undeniable. At the same time, President Biden expects an indefinite increase in financial support from Congress for the war effort with no outlined strategy for eventual peace. This should alarm all of us. The whatever it takes mentality seems to include negatively impacting our own capacity and our own readiness challenges. Amid an ongoing war in Israel now and in the shadow of the CCP aggression and what looks like an imminent threat in the South China Sea, our own capacity and our own readiness are dangerous trade-offs that we are making in support of Ukraine. Russia is like that slow, high snowball that you throw in a fight to distract folks. While they're looking up at that slow, high snowball, the other kid throws that line drive to the forehead. And China, in this case, the CCP, is that line drive to the forehead in terms of our own nation's security. The U.S. should decouple humanitarian aid and remove any funding that subsidizes Ukrainian government officials and workers. If we're to effectively support the war effort moving forward, American scope should make sure that our involvement is only to that of defeating Russians on the front lines. That means providing the necessary weapon systems and tactics to win, not to tie, but to win. If we continue to blend and dilute the military aid with humanitarian aid, we're not going to be supporting a victory. We're enabling a dependency on American taxpayers, and we're enabling a tie on the battlefield. I predict a few future strategic errors that will be aggravated by a trail of already realized strategic errors by this administration. The patterns of the administration under Biden's strategic errors combined with Russia's proclivity to engage in protracted wars and the Biden administration's inability to understand these strategic implications is basically buying us a long-term stalemate. They're harbingers of a costly and potentially escalated conflict with Russia, riddled with future strategic errors as well. And any responsible legislator right now on both sides of the aisle must be asking smart and reasonable questions today before supporting more taxpayer aid to Ukraine. Any well-intentioned leader in the White House should also be chomping at the bit to answer these questions from Congress. I see not a willingness to not answer these questions as a red flag out of this administration. So let's cover some of the questions that need to be answered from this administration, as well as President Zelensky in some cases. Both President Biden and President Zelensky must provide the U.S. Congress with an actual win strategy. Simply stating that we are with you until we prevail, or we must win, are actually not win strategies. How does Ukraine prevail, and how long is this expected to take? These estimates don't need to be exact, but we should understand the end state goal, and we should understand the exit criteria as well as a price tag associated with that win. President Biden and Secretary of Defense Austin need to clearly update the American people on the status of the war and the war front in Ukraine. This includes informing the public on the Ukrainian progress to date, the progress of the spring offensive that seems to be stalled out, outlining causal factors for the current stalemate, and providing a status update on the spring counteroffensive moving forward. President Biden and Secretary Austin must explain why the U.S. investments are necessary. This includes outlining which weapons are being sent and how those specific weapons will help win the war, not just prolong it. Also, it's important to get an assessment of which weapons have not been sent, but could have altered the trajectory of the war if they had been sent before today. President Biden and Secretary Austin should provide Congress with a list of weapons that have not been sent but would be effective in altering the current stalemate. This administration's current slow drip policy that Dan Crenshaw outlined has a prolonged effect of hurting Ukraine in the long run rather than helping them. And it's the responsibility of Congress to play a role in deciding what additional capabilities should be offered to Ukraine. President Biden and Secretary Austin must explain what would happen if American investments into Ukraine cease. Do we believe EU and NATO nations would also divest from the efforts? Would Ukraine not be able to survive and win? If not, why? What core military exports would absolutely be necessary to enable that win? The U.S. Treasury and Commerce need to report to Congress with the level of enforcement and compliance of already approved sanctions against Russia. No one is providing regular and thorough updates to Congress on these sanction fronts. The U.S. and all NATO members should also adopt a full sanction policy against Russia to include all oil, all grain, and rare earth minerals. These three critical exports are currently not meaningfully impacted by global sanctions, and they represent the bulk of export revenue to Russia. President Biden and Secretary Austin must provide a clear explanation of why resources are being requested are the right ones and are enabling the win. And also, does the U.S. and Ukraine have an alignment on mission objectives? We hear about this desire to go and reclaim Crimea by the Ukrainians. I don't think that reflects the strategies and goals of our own administration. And how do you reconcile those differences? The last two, President Biden and President Zelensky must continue to provide Congress with a full accounting to the max extent possible of weapon systems that have been sent and used to date. And last, President Biden must provide a commitment and evidence to the fact that his administration is not jeopardizing the cost and schedule of critical domestic weapon programs or commitments that we've made to our Taiwan partners with FMF programs or to our Israeli partners with FMS and FMF programs. We cannot cannibalize the capacity of our own capabilities or our strategic partners to meet the demands and commitments to Ukraine. I'll end with this. The president has also sent a veto threat to the U.S. Congress, House, and Senate that he will veto the NDAA with a specific focus and rationale for that veto being a $2 billion cost footprint to give our junior enlisted a pay raise that they deserve and is long overdue. Our current enlisted members start at $22,000 a year. My pay raise for junior enlisted would take that starting salary from $22,000 to $31,200 a year. It gets them above the poverty line, gets them off of food stamps, and this president has cited that pay increase as one of the reasons to veto the NDAA. I think if we are spending this type of money on other nations' security, we owe it to our troops to spend the $2 billion necessary to get them off of food stamps. With that, I'll yield back to my friend Dan Crenshaw.